morning, everyone. We would like to welcome everyone back for the second day of our training course working in a circular economy context. We very much appreciated all of your input yesterday. Perhaps it was the yoga after all that made it so interactive yesterday. And we plan to make today as interactive as we did yesterday. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand in chat or post your questions on Slido or in the Zoom chat, obviously. Today we have a new program for you where we will provide a more in-depth picture of the circular economy transition. We will start today off with a presentation by Stein Janssens with Flanders Circular. Thereafter, Christina Crespo with Itainova will discuss the transition into a climate neutral Europe in the region of Aragon in Spain. Now I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker of today. Stein Janssens is a materials engineer who graduated in 2003 at the University of Leuven in Belgium. After 14 years of working in the design and build of aircraft in an international company, he jumped to the other spectrum of the aviation life cycle in 2017 and joined a startup company introducing the circular economy in the aircraft end of life sector. In 2021, he joined the team of Circular Flanders, the hub and inspirator of the Flemish circular economy. Circular Flanders is a partnership of governments, companies, civil society, and the knowledge community that takes action together. Stein is a facilitator of circular economy and mainly works on the support and development of educational trajectories. So without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jip, for this kind introduction. And a warm welcome to everybody of you, and thanks for hosting us and letting us provide this talk on circular economy and have this insight with you together. So on the agenda today, of course, circular economy. And I would like to jump in with the main message and key takeaway already, if you want, for this session, and that this the proof and the conviction that the circular economy should be seen and judged as an opportunity for our business, an opportunity for future-proof business. It's a competitive asset, a competitive advantage, and it should be treated and looked like that. And I hope to be able, together with my colleague Miguel Hoedsales, who also works at Circular Flanders, to convince you of these insights, and of course, along with it, to answer eventual questions you might have on how to implement this in your activities. So the timeline looks as follows. We would propose to start with a couple of minutes with a short warm-up to get everybody completely into the circular economy mindset. And after that, a deep dive into the circular economy itself, of course. We would like to provide you our insights and share this with you with respect of what a circular economy is, in fact, but even more important, why we should think and consider a circular economy in the first place. Why is this important? And do we have to choose between working on circular economy and taking climate action? I cannot do everything at the same time. Do I have to choose? We get these questions quite often. So we would like to talk a couple of minutes also on that field and show you how a circular economy and choosing to take action on that field directly also has an impact for free, if you want, on the climate footprint. And that's important. And along with it, we also like to give you some concrete ways on how to implement a circular economy in your activity, whether it is business, government agencies, development agencies, or whatever sector you are. Concretely, how you can grab this circular economy future evolution and implement this in your activities. Of course, I would say ample illustrated with examples from the field, examples that we in the region of Flanders know of, but also internationally, to show you how this can look like in reality. We have done 50 minutes Q&A, so no doubt after the session you might have some questions. So of course feel free to either drop them in the chat, as Jip mentioned, or wait and group your questions until the Q&A at 10:30. We'd also like to provide some time, and we reserved half an hour for that, of course, to have a short break. but also during the longer break, as I said, half an hour, to think about for yourself how the circular economy could look like in your activity and do a small exercise. Reserve 20 minutes to think about concretely for your field of action, for your jobs or sector, how what you've heard and looked and discussed today, how this would look like in your specific field. And then after that exercise, we reserve again at least 50 minutes, maybe a bit longer if we see that some questions arise for a Q&A after this exercise. Now, first of all, this is the, you know that, this is the periodic table of elements. There's no secret in that. And this is it. This is it. This is what is available on Earth. And more is not possible. We'll have to do it with what you see here. There's nothing additionally somewhere in under the crust of the Earth apart from this. This is what we have to do it with for the rest of the decades to come. And as I recall from my chemistry lessons, it's a while ago, but still I seem to recall it. We speak about 118 elements, chemical elements, of which a large part of them is actually of no practical use, exist only for a couple of nanoseconds in a lab. About, I would say, between 40 and 50 are really of practical industrial use. And this is it. Yeah, there's nothing more than this. This is what we'll have to do and use for the next couple of decades. So what we'll treat today is, first of all, what is actually a circular economy? Well, in this course, the last days or the last hours, the last period, maybe even, you might have been faced with circular economy. You come along this for quite a time now, but actually, what is that? And more important, why do we have to talk about circular economy? In the third part, we will discuss and show you how you can implement this in your sector, very concretely, with examples. But also, to be completely transparent and honest, there are some challenges associated with the adoption of the circular economy, and we would like to put these on the table as well. Sometimes it's not easy to implement that. You will come across some issues, you will face some problems, and we have to be transparent and fair on this, and we would like to share at least some of the challenges that we are aware of. And of course, to conclude, some references further on to conclude. Now, let's first do a small exercise on Slido. You see here a QR code. We have prepared a couple of small, quick and dirty questions. If you take your mobile phone and you use the QR code that you see right here, you should come along a question that well, at least about 3 questions that we prepared just to have a small view and poll and warm-up exercise. All right, so if I go to the next slide. Yep. The first question you see right here is, what is the first word, very easy, that pops into your mind when you think about circular economy? So scan a QR code with your mobile and feel free to drop in some first thoughts and words that pop up into your mind when we speak about circular economy. Okay, I see green, that makes sense. Recycling aspects as well. Sustainability seems to come along quite often. To drop in on the recycling aspect, yes, it is part of a circular economy. We will see in the next big hour that it is part of a circular economy, but absolutely not equal to. The circular economy offers much more than a recycling economy, and you will see why this is the case. I see evolution, yes, for sure. It's a trend and a future trend that will need to be adapted by a lot of businesses. And again, it should be treated as a competitive advantage and not something that you have to just undergo. Reduction of waste, absolutely. We will also see that the circular economy, or at least one of the ways to adopt a circular economy, is the intelligent definition and use of raw materials, of resources. Redesign, rethink, very nice to see this popping up. Indeed, also part of a circular economy adoption in a company equals the rethink of some products and also the design. We will see that the design of a product closes doors or keep doors open, along the value chain of the product. And if you have a bad design, you will have troubles and issues later on in the chain to get your materials back. So design is indeed a very good and interesting thought. Sustainability apparently is the biggest one, as expected, I would say. And indeed, the sustainability is a bigger word where the circular economy, I would say, is part of. And again, we will see in a couple of minutes how the circular economy supports a shift to a better climate and lower greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you very much. Let's go to the next quick and dirty question. Is your company or institution that you work in today already using circular practices? A very, I would say, almost binary answer, yes or no, or maybe you don't know. So this is very interesting again. So from the audience, it seems that I would say the big chunk of participants, about 60%, works in a context either private or non-private, where there are no circular practices adopted yet today. Some, about 15%, are sure that there are some practices adopted, and about 30% that are not aware of any specific actions in the field. I think the important number here is almost 60%. So which shows that, first of all, you're absolutely at your place to follow these sessions and this course and this trajectory. And I hope that you, after this session, assemble some material and insights and a toolbox to get started within your context. Thank you very much. So let's then drop into the circular economy, shall we? So maybe first of all, to resume, what does a circular economy mean? Is there a definition? And you come across quite some definitions depending on the source, but we would like to keep it very simple. Very simple with, I would say, one sentence, and that is the definition that you see here, define a circular economy as a specific type of economy that keeps, and that's important, the raw materials as long as possible in use, but also with maximal value. A maximum value word is important because in a recycling economy, you can keep materials in loop for years and years, but not actually trying to maximize their value. And in a circular economy, that's the difference with a simple recycling value. You try to not only keep the materials as long as possible in use, but also maximize their economical value. Therefore, we speak about a circular economy, right? After all. And for doing that, you can make use, and you have to make use of some specific strategies, some circular strategies in different fields to accomplish that. And these strategies can be allocated in the type of business model you use, the design of your product or service, the production aspect, the complete life cycle, including the end of life phase. So in the circular economy, we really look at the complete value chain, life cycle as well of your product, of your service. But the core target is always to keep the materials used as long as possible in use and with maximizing their economical value. Now, when we speak about recycling economy, we have used the word already a couple of times already. It's somewhere in between, and this schematic shows it quite well. Today, we operate in a linear economy, right? We take materials, extract this from the earth. We produce and design a product or a service. The consumer buys it, consumes it, and then after consumption, wastes it, throws it away, and it ends up in a bin. In the recycling economy, we try to keep those materials in a couple of loops and not directly send this to the bin, but cycle around for 1, 2, maybe even 3 times to recycle the materials. But you might know within the recycling field, some materials are limited in the amount of cycles that you can. Aluminium, for instance, is close to endless recyclable in theory, but in practice, it's about 6 or 7 times because the quality degrades, etc. So that's the recycling economy. In a circular economy, we not only want to recycle, but we want to have, first of all, a better recycling, eventually an endless type of loops recycling, but also, as said, and that's important, a whole lot of other measures largely before the recycling moment comes. And then we speak about other design, different business models, intensify the use of materials via sharing platforms, etc., etc. So a whole battery of strategies to do a lot more than only recycling at the end of your product life cycle. And that's what we call the circular economy, ideally evolving to the situation where you don't have to waste anything at all. Now, why do we have to speak about the circular economy? Why do we talk about this, and why do even businesses have to talk about this? And I will give you 6 reasons, 6 important reasons to do so. And the first one is the most logical one. And it's the simple fact that raw materials are limited. This graph shows, or this map shows the origin, the sources of some critical raw materials. And you see there cobalt, which is important for all the mobile phones, battery systems, EVs, and complete energy transition, if you want an electrification of a lot of products. Comes from the States. You see there also niobium, tantalum, which is in microelectronics important elements. You see platinum, again, cobalt, indium, and a couple of other, let's say, strategic and critical raw materials, elements. And you also see a big gray zone. And well, this zone happens to be Europe, which brings us to the conclusion that actually in Europe, we don't have any of those critical materials at all. None of them. We have to import and are as such completely dependent on import of these materials from the rest of those continents. And I don't have to tell you, with the current geopolitical situation in Russia/Ukraine, after, not to speak about the last 2.5 years COVID, what influence that had on the stability of supply chains and raw material pricing. So, but those raw materials are limited. It's not endless, and they are not in Europe. And it's no coincidence that, of course, Europe, in its legislation and efforts, put forward very strongly circular economy action plans, very concretely, because it's a strategic advantage to disconnect from this dependence. Yeah. So it's not a coincidence, and this is the reason why it is so important also politically in Europe. Now, the raw materials are limited, of course. We can doubt if this, let's say, this insight is already there with the big material users. As we speak and as we are having this session, a number of raw materials, of course, extraction adds up, and you see the live numbers here adding up. Well, there will be a moment that these, well, I would say the volume is just depleted, and we better find other solutions to mitigate that already today. Because do not be mistaken, we don't speak about 50 years to come. Some of the elements we just discussed have a reserve, if you want, of only about 10 to 15 years. Yeah? So it will be very critical in very short time. Raw materials are limited. Yes, again, this shows you the raw materials that we see as required for the green transition, and it's not Circular Flanders that has developed this data. It comes from the International Energy Agency, actually splitting up over time what amount of raw materials we need actually to implement this green transition. Offshore windmills, EVs, electrification, etc. All these electrification efforts require materials, those critical materials you just saw on the map. And well, you can derive the conclusion, I think, for yourself looking at this graph. We are now about 2022. If you take a look at 2030 all the way up till even 2050, almost 2050, about 2040, looking at the right end of this curve, you see that about 4 times more materials are needed to implement this green transition. And it's very simple. We don't have these materials. We don't have these materials at all. So if we want to evolve to a completely green transition and implement the plans that we have and are on the table already, we'll have to make quickly work of reusing, intensifying the use of those raw materials very quickly, because otherwise it will be a showstopper for the green transition because we don't have the materials at all. A second reason to get started with circular economy is simply because it's a law. It's a law, well, in the region where we operate and work, the Flemish region. I will just give you a couple of examples in a minute of the bigger picture. We have the ambition to reduce the footprint raw material by 30% by 2030. And this seems to be a comfortable number, 30% doable. But if you translate this to intermediate milestones, it means quite something. When we talk with businesses and we ask them, think about how your business could reduce your material usage in your company by 15% by 2025. Most of them have some thoughts, some ways to do this. It's possible, sometimes not easy, but most of the companies have some ideas to do that. But when the next question is posed, and how are you going to do a saving of minus 15% 5 years later again, then it becomes very quiet in the room. And the solutions to do that are not so easy or require more money, more time, and means often for companies sometimes a radical change in their operations or in their business model. So 30% reduction by 2030 means quite something, but this is the law. This is finalized. This will have to be realized. Will have to be realized because by 2050, in our region, we want to be fully circular. And again, from 30% 20 years later to fully circular, it's a giant leap, right? But to get to this giant leap, you have to have intermediate milestones, and the 30% by 2030 is the first one. But already this one will not be easy. Of course, we are not operating in Flanders alone. This is happening in a context, a European context of legislation and targets. And I think it's no secret, you might know this already, that well, quite recently, only a year ago in February last year, 2021, the European Parliament has adopted the resolution on the need and implementation of a circular economy action plan. And the circular economy action plan, this European plan, will be cascaded to the different member states and be translated for all European member states in legislation and targets for your region, for your country. So be sure, if it's not yet the case, it's coming up very quickly, and you will see this popping up very, very soon, because it's a law, it's decided. A third reason is not political or strategic, it's economically, purely economic. It's a requirement if you want to operate a business that is healthy and that is future-proof. We all come from COVID period, and although it's not completely over, the situation is luckily a bit more loose today. But you might remember very well, not so long ago, the video footage from the Evergreen in the Panama Channel, blocking quite some important parts of the worldwide supply chain. But more important, the shipping delays you have due to these worldwide events went just completely out of the roof. And we did in this period with Circular Flanders a small test, and we asked companies if they experienced shortages in their material supply during the crisis. And the result is quite interesting, because you see the companies that have adopted or had adopted a number of circular strategies already, they indicated that 66% of them had no shortages at all, or were quite bothered with the situation. Although the vast majority, 98% of the non-circular companies indicated that they had some issues with the supply chain raw material. Well, the reason is simple. In a circular strategy, you are much less dependent on material inflows, let it be from the other side of the world. So it means it's healthy and future-proof business. You're less dependent on those transport logistics. A couple of other evolutions, again, you might have seen on lithium as a prime element needed in the transition to electrification for battery systems, to be precise. Again, there the mining efforts are catching up or trying to catch up, but well, first of all, it goes quite slowly. And secondly, again, here, the lithium availability reserves are not, again, from that size that they can provide an answer and provide volumes to those needed sectors. Combined with the global chip shortage we had even this year, OEMs from automotive constructions, builders, you might recall, they didn't have any chips yet. Electronic companies had to block and stop their production lines due to the chip shortages, again linked to the availability of materials and elements to produce these. Not to speak about the pricing of elements, if they would already be available, went through the roof. You see here the graph of a couple of products, price rise over the certain evolution, which goes through the roof, and also with respect to construction materials, again, also clearly a steep material increase of the price. And this is not only linked to COVID. You see on the x-axis that it goes as far as January 2019. So how does a circular economy then provides answers and gets your company or sector much more robust against these evolutions, against these trends? And why is this a requirement for future-proof business? Because you've seen, if you adopt a circular economy operation, you put yourself in a position where you are far less dependent on external supply chain of materials. You have a higher supply chain stability, and that's important. But next to this, purely linked to the supply chain stability, you weaponize yourself also much more against price fluctuations. You have seen the graphs in the previous slide. Materials pricing is still today increasing. Construction metals, wood, you might know this from your country as well. Maybe you're renovating your house and had asked an offer which is now 30% higher. These are the stories that you hear surely today. No worker wants to give you an offer and fixing the price, so you have some risk there. You are prone to serious raw material price fluctuations. And if you adopt a circular economy practice, you put yourself much more independent from these fluctuations. And economically, obviously, that's a big advantage. Now, we get sometimes the questions, okay, very good, I adopt a circular economy practice, but if this means that I design and produce a better product, I will sell less products, right? If I have washing machines and I make these so good that they operate not 5 years, but at least 15 years, circular economy wise, top story. But then the sales guy says, well, actually I'm selling 100 washing machines each month today. And if I make better products, my sales will go down. I will sell less products. So do I shoot myself in the foot here or not? The question is, the answer is no, because indeed you might cannibalize your product sales, you sell less, but first of all, the price might be 15% higher. So it's not a given that in your revenue stream, it will be a problem. But apart from that, in a circular economy practice, you will try to compensate if this is a problem in the first case, to create new income streams in new business lines. For your top product, you will create revenue in after-sales services, in repair services, in the offer of spare parts, things that you did typically not before. You were just selling washing machines. So the eventual loss, and I put the word eventual with a question mark, that you have by lowering your product sales can be compensated by creating new income streams. And this is, of course, sometimes it's not easy. Companies are used to think in their niche, in their core business, and don't look over the hedge about what happens once the product is sold, but it's the way to do it. In marketing terms, not sure if there are some people with a marketing background here, but it's also an advantage because if you sell a washing machine one time, you see this client in the shop once, and then you don't see this client 15 years after, right? If you offer these new income streams, even selling lower absolute number of goods, you see this client a couple of times back in the lifetime of the product. If you talk about after-sales service, if you talk about repair service, if you talk about spare parts, where you do business with, you gain money with it. You do not only gain money with it, but it increases in marketing terms the client connection. We speak about client attachment. You see this client a number of times back, and so the client will attach himself and get used to your brand more intensively compared to only coming in a shop once and buy a product once. And this is in marketing terms an advantage, which is sometimes underestimated. In economical terms, adopting the circular economy for a future-proof business provides you a more stable cash flow. Sometimes, and we'll see a couple of examples, the service model is put forward as a way to implement circular economy. It's just one of the models, and as far as I'm concerned, it's not per se the ideal formula always. But it offers the example to have a stable income. Instead of selling a machine once and having 300 euros income, you will not sell this washing machine maybe, but you will say, I provide you this washing machine and you pay me 50 euros a month, and I provide you the service that comes along with it. So you get less income over the year, but it's a lower value, but on a longer term, 50 euros every month instead of 300 or 400 euros once. And of course, maybe even the most important, the raw material costs in production are much lower. Today, we see that typically in big companies, about 40% of the total cost of making this product is purely linked to the cost of raw materials. This is European average. I know in the Flemish region, the number is even higher. But this means that if you work on lower raw material costs, this directly has an impact into your margin for your company. Because 40% of your costs are linked to that. So it's absolutely okay, yep. Okay, there we go again. So it's absolutely a requirement for a healthy and future-proof business for the reasons I just explained. If you're not convinced yet that you should adopt a circular economy in your business or activity, another reason, and next one. The capital and funding rounds will make your life much more easy. A couple of graphs to illustrate this. Apart from the fact that Europe links in its funding dossiers in a lot of funding mechanisms, if you want to pick up funding or apply for a funding, European funding, almost always there is a finality, a requirement to have an impact on green or sustainable impact on society. And the trend, if you see the graph right here, shows this clearly. More and more money from Europe to climate finance, the bigger picture climate, including circular economy, will be important to show that your application, your dossier, takes steps in the right direction. And if you cannot prove that these are the steps taken in the right direction, you will not be eligible for funding. Other companies will prove that they can and get the grant. Apart from the funding, not sure if some of you are involved in startups, but smaller companies, we talk typically about seed or VC capital, either supplied by financing institutions or business angels or whatever mechanism. The graph on the left shows that for the States, that from 95 until 2020, the evolution of sustainable investing. And well, the graph is quite clear, right? It's a booming graph. It's almost exponentially, I would say, showing that the vast majority of investing criteria includes today ESG, so environment or social linked goals, in order to be eligible for such capital rounds. So if you do not work in a sustainable way, let it be adopt a circular economy to improve your impact, lower your impact, and get advantages to a more sustainable economy, you will not get your money. Investors have the choice to put their investments, their money, in companies that do bring along a societal or sustainable advantage, and they will have priority. And it's not only priority, the other ones will simply get no money at all. the graph is very clear on that. So if you don't think and operate in a green way or adopt a circular economy, you will be having a lot of difficulties to get grants or funding. And secondly, if applicable, will have a hard life in picking up money on the capital market. If you're still not convinced to adopt a circular economy in your company or in your sector, another reason is the job creation and the attraction of top talent. The circular economy, and this is more for development agencies purely or policy makers, creates new jobs. You see a couple of numbers right here. Because if you talk about circular economy, you speak about repair, you speak about typically some labor-intensive practices, some low-tech jobs typically, that offer new opportunities for the social profit and non-profit. And that's important because we can include in that way a social view and a social advantage on this evolution. By 2030, the national product growth, and this is calculated by the European Commission, is envisaged to grow by 0.5%, resulting in approximately 700,000 jobs. So the circular economy adoption, it's not a threat to the business. It's a financial advantage, and it offers new jobs on the European scale. And for individual companies, and that's important as well, new workers attach themselves much stronger than previously in the previous years to the company values. Young people want to work in a company that makes a difference, right? That does good, has an impact in a positive way on society, and they attach themselves much more than previously to those company values. They don't want to work for companies that don't bother with the climate or environment at all. This means that if your company adopts an honest and real circular economy operation, it will also be something, an element that you can play along and attract future talent with. And that's also important in a market, certainly the high-skilled market where there is the so-called war on talent, it will be advantages. If you're still not convinced that the circular economy is something that you should think about and implement, another reason is the climate ones. And I come back on the question that we put before. Do I have to choose between a circular economy and working on the climate greenhouse gas emission reductions? I said we get these questions quite often, and the answer is no, you don't have to choose. It's even much simpler. If you work on measures and adopt a circular economy in your company or sector, you directly, for free, automatically take a couple of steps in reducing your greenhouse gas emission footprint. Because you see the number linking both right here, the number is 39%. Everything that is linked to the extraction and processing of raw materials worldwide is responsible for about 39% of the world greenhouse gas emissions. Which means that, and this is coming from a Circular Gap report from last year, which means that if you work on consuming less raw materials, using them in a much more efficient way, the circular economy, you would directly have also an impact on lowering the greenhouse gas emissions. And in that way, the circular economy is an enabler to implement and evolve to a future with less greenhouse gas emissions. Now, these are the 6 reasons, important and big reasons why you should implement the circular economy in your sector. Apart from the economic side, also, as said, some strategic and social sides. Now, fair enough about these reasons, the 6 reasons, but you probably asked a question on how do I have to implement this in my business, in an economic situation even. And I will give you some ways and examples how people do this, how companies do this, very concretely. I would say the most important diagram to guide you through this thinking process is this one. And for reasons that you can understand, we call this the butterfly diagram. You have left and the right side here that looks a bit like a butterfly. On the right side, you see some value loops of the more technical materials. And on the left side, you see similar value loops, but for the biological cycle. Food, food waste, vegetables, the biological streams, let's say. So today, and that's visible in the center, we extract materials, we mine them, we make a part, a product, or define a service. The consumer buys it, and then afterwards dumps it in a linear economy. And today, if we speak about dumping, this is equal to either burning it, and this is then the red rectangle there. In, well, the best case, I would say, between brackets, along this burning process, some heat is recuperated and used. And in the very worst case, nothing happens at all with the material streams. It's not even burned because, as we say, the caloric value is too low, or it's completely difficult, or it does not burn at all. Some materials are made not to burn. It ends up in a landfill and nothing happens with it. In a circular economy, these red rectangles have to be avoided completely. We want to keep materials in the loop forever and always. And this is, if I take the right side of the butterfly diagram as an example, you see here some value loops, and you see, well, a different color, right? The smallest loop with the brightest color keeps the highest value of your product. So what you will try to do is, first of all, your product, repair this, make sure that in the design it is repairable, prolong the lifetime of your product by maintaining it, offering repair services, etc., and keep the product as the product it was designed for. You spend a lot of time and money on making this product, so you then make sure that it can be used as long as possible by this maintain, prolong, or repair schemes. This offers the highest value, and this is the inner cycle. If for whatever reason this is not possible, you might consider to reuse or redistribute this product. In this case, the product still looks like the product it was designed for, but is used by somebody else, maybe in a completely different sector, or is redistributed to somebody else. These two inner loops are meant to either extend the life cycle of your product or to intensify the use of it. If you talk about sharing systems, this can be classified also under this chapter, because sharing is also intensifying the use rate of materials. If you have a car, well, you know the number, the car, I'm not sure what the percentage by heart is, but most of the time the car is standing still, right? You use the car to drive 50 minutes and then it stands a couple of hours just still. So it's not a very high intensive use rate of the materials in your car, right? If you share the car, those materials are much more intensively used, and it prevents another car with another set of materials to be used and extracted. So these are all ways to intensify the use rate or to prolong the lifetime of your product. Again, if this is not possible or not anymore possible for whatever reason, we come to the refurbish and remanufacture stage, where companies will again pick up their products, clean them, make sure that maybe some small components are replaced, which are worn out, and they resell them, and that's important, with company guarantee. It is not a second-hand shop or a second-hand online platform where people like you and me sell their computer screen or a pair of shoes. In this case, in the refurbish and remanufacture, the products go back to the producer, the company, the factory, and they do some things with it. Again, refresh it, replace some minor components maybe, and they sell it. And again, important, with company guarantee. And then we talk about the refurbish and remanufacturing stage. And then and only then, at the final stage, and only then we come at the recycling. And now you understand why a recycling economy is not at all equal to a circular economy. A circular economy offers and implements a lot more than recycling, much more advanced in this product life cycle. But let's be honest, every product sooner or later comes at this stage where it's not usable anymore. Face it, it is like that. And so sooner or later we'll have to recycle those materials in use, and then you have to make sure that those materials used are recyclable in the first place and have a recycling process which does not degrade the material and is preferably endless recyclable without quality loss. And then we speak about different value loops of the circular economy diagram. And you can think about which of those value loops you might implement in your company for your service. You don't have to implement each of them. Some companies pick only one and completely focus on that. But this is a, let's say, exhaustive overview of what circular economy strategies can be used in a company context. What is not on this slide, but it's also important to note, is the fact that in your design, if you design a product, of course, like I said, 80% of the possibilities, the doors are closed or kept open in your design. If you design a product that you cannot open, it means that it's not repairable at all, and a lot of those circular economy best practices will not be possible anymore. So everything starts with an appropriate design that is suited for allowing those circular economy ways to be used. Apart from the design, this means that some business models can be used as well to facilitate each of those cycles. Typically, companies that start a repair income stream did not those things in the past, and so they have to adapt a bit their business model and figure out some financials. So the business model typically also changes when you implement one of those cycles. I will go quicker on this one because this is actually an overview of circular procurement. If you say, okay, I have these different value streams, the way in the butterfly diagram to implement a circular economy for my activity. Sometimes, and quite a lot of these actions can be linked to purchasing. And I'm not sure if there are people with a purchasing background in this session. I will not go over them, but this graph you can take along after the session to take a look on how procurement power is used to implement the circular economy, which means that even by not doing anything at all in your company and just buying goods you need from secondary parties, from other parties, from suppliers of your company, you can excel some pushing power, some criteria in your procurement policy to push your suppliers to evolve to a circular economy operation. And then we speak about the procurement system where you reduce what you have to procure in terms of materials. You look in your supply chain for suppliers that use recycled material and not virgin material, for instance, and as you can see in yellow B part. But from a procurement side, you can also think about extension of guarantees that you ask your suppliers in the extension of the product life cycle, etc., etc. So this graph, this slide, shows a consolidated view on some measures that you can use linked to the procurement activities in a company or business. Again, even procurers, they have quite some power to implement and cascade a circular economy in your supply chain, so not only in your own company or your own context. Well, I will skip this one, but just to illustrate why I say this procurement, and it's a bit more linked maybe even to today to government agencies, because they have an exemplary function in civil procurement. About 15% of the greenhouse gas emissions is linked to public procurement. Public procurement is a big chunk of the procurement transactions in a company typically. 15% in terms of emissions is quite significant, of course. So the point here is that as a government or as a development agency, also sometimes you have quite some power also to have a pilot, an exemplary function, and implement procurement measures to have a leading example function, so to speak. Now let's get to some examples and make this some more concrete now. So I will show you in the next couple of slides some concrete examples on how this can look like. Each time saying which of those value loops of the butterfly diagram they have used. The first example is Fairphone. Well, you recognize, you might not know the brand, and I don't want to make some publicity for any brand at all, but it's a front-running and circular economy adaptation. It's a mobile phone, obviously, but it's not a simple mobile phone as we know it. It's a mobile phone that integrates quite a lot of circular economy measures in their design, in their business model. Well, all of us, we all have a smartphone or mobile phone. You might know that the average lifetime of a mobile phone is not even 3 years, 2.7 years to be precise. And then it ends up in the waste. Well, a lot of us, and I'm sure that almost all of you have some smartphone somewhere in your house, in the drawer, in your desk or whatever place that you did not yet throw away. So most people, for whatever reason, they keep it. Sometimes as a music player, sometimes as just a memory storage, which is good. Then you use the mobile phone at least for a function it is still working for. But if this is not the case anymore, even then, most people, they keep it somewhere in a drawer at home, which means you're actually blocking quite some critical materials to be used for the next production of the mobile phones, right? Which leads me to the number you see on the slide left. 20% of all mobiles worldwide, this is a worldwide number, are recycled. Only 20%. Knowing that you have quite some critical materials, gold, copper, etc., that are used in these phones. And so Fairphone made quite a disruption in this sector because, well, apart from raw materials, they also on that field use only recycled materials, so recycled copper. The social aspect is taken into account. They scan and monitor the source of their materials quite thoroughly. So all materials they source are conflict-free, and it's quickly set, but much more difficult to control on the terrain, really, in practice. But they go quite far in this. But the most interesting part here is the fact that they designed this phone completely differently from what is used today. And they use a modular design. And this exploded view, if you want, shows it quite clearly. Well, I have to nuance this a bit. Almost every component that you can see right here is irreplaceable and repairable by yourself. You probably didn't expect yourself being a phone repairer or an expert in electronics, but you absolutely are without knowing this. If you buy a Fairphone, you get a small screwdriver with it. And in the design, it's made in such a way that every particular buyer, you, myself, can dismantle, can just repair it for yourself. And you also can buy the majority of those individual components at Fairphone to replace it. We had in my previous company the Fairphone as a company phone. My colleague dropped this on day one on the ground. Great, the screen broke. And we could directly check the advantages of such design because he himself used a screwdriver. He demounted the front screen, ordered it with Fairphone, and 2 days after he got the new screen and could repair it himself. So the best proof, as far as I'm concerned, that it actually works. Because, well, what happens today is that you throw away the complete mobile phone, but only one element is broken. Either the camera is broken or the screen is cracked or whatever. So this allows, in a modular design, to repair and replace only the component that is broken and, well, reuse the phone as a phone afterwards. It is quicker said than done because today in the fast-moving consumer goods, certainly with electronics as mobile phones, smartphone, Apple, Samsung, Motorola, etc., all those big marks, they have in their supply chain a typical contractual 2-year guarantee on spare parts, which means that their supplier of Apple only supplies spare parts for 2 years. And afterwards, it's done and finished. They cannot guarantee spare parts at all, which means that if your Apple iPhone has a problem after 2 years, they won't find the spare components in worst case. And so Fairphone, in their modular design, anticipating on replacement of each of those single components, either a battery, a camera, a processor, a screen, they had to ask in their supply chain much more than 2 years certitude on the supply of spare parts, and their suppliers on this sector were not at all used in doing that. So it was a big change. And this is an illustration of circular economy design, but also getting new value streams on for a much better product on the offer and selling of spare parts and repair activities. And again, an example of good design by using not only this modular approach, repairable approach, but also the adoption and use of an important share of recycled plastics in the materials they use, 50% to be precise. Well, not to mention why this is important, why this is put as an example, because if you take 1 ton of cell phones against 1 ton of gold ore, you see here the amount of gold you extract with 1 ton of ore, 0.2 grams only, and you have 1 ton of cell phones, you extract at least 150 grams of gold. So actually today, it's much more interesting to extract gold from cell phones than from the Earth's crust. And that's why it's important to keep those cell phones and end-of-life electronics in the recycling scheme, because at least then the materials could be reused again. Now, Volvo is another example. This is an example of how in the automotive, in the design stage, 1/3, and it's not only valid for the automotive branch, but also not truck branch of Volvo, at least 1/3 of the materials used are coming from a recycled source, so no virgin material. We speak about the R content and the recycled content, 50% in terms of steel and 97% in terms of casting steel. But not only this, it's a very interesting remanufacturing example here. Remanufacturing meaning that Volvo assures that they absorb back, they get back the parts or materials, and they reuse this again as a component in their production line. We call it remanufacturing. As I explained a couple of minutes ago, they clean it, they replace maybe some minor components that are broken, and they use it again, this product or this assembly, in their production line. And it's not only interesting in terms of footprint. To be precise, you have 80% lower energy footprint compared to producing a new assembly, but it's also good business. It's good business because Volvo calculated this, and they saw, they are active on this field already a couple of years today. They had a 60% remanufacturing market increase foreseen by 2025. So very quickly, very soon, compared with what they have in the 2018 baseline. So this market is going very, very quickly. And for Volvo, it's good business, because you see here on the photograph on the left, a big transmission with an engine of a Volvo truck. If they have to produce this thing from scratch, from virgin material, they need some materials, they have a certain energy footprint. And if they take this back and they clean it, put this again on a very good quality standard, obviously it requires money and time of the workers, but even so, the cost of doing that is much lower than the cost of making a completely new one. And the standard is given with, again, company guarantee. And so it's better business. It's economically more interesting, and you reduce, of course, the greenhouse gas emission footprint because you don't source virgin materials. So remanufacturing is cheaper than new production, and you generate new income streams. So it's a booming business for Volvo in this case. Patagonia is another example of design, circular design. They use, and I go very quickly on that, it's quite straightforward, I would say, the use of either biomaterials or materials that are today even 100% coming from recycled plastic streams, PET or polyethylene to be precise. And this is a deliberate design choice to use these kind of materials. In the same mark, Patagonia, it's not only design. As an example to the different value streams in the butterfly diagram, you have the repair and reuse aspect here adopted as well. And they have seen at Patagonia that this reuse aspect becomes very important. They have recently above 120,000 items sold, but even more important, this second-hand market grows 21 times faster over the last year compared to the regular fashion market. So again, this is good business, right? Because they don't have to produce either materials or textile fashion items again from scratch. They can, again, with some money and time, with some associated costs, bring back these textiles to a standard where they can be sold again, and it's good business. The market grows 21 times faster than the regular one. And so Patagonia has adopted deliberately some business models, even separate shops to do so. For the people coming from a more industrial background, this is an example from Dupont. This is very, very material oriented, where they use an aramid fiber. Aramid is known to be very difficult to recycle because it's chemically inert, it's UV resistant, it's temperature resistant. Actually, it's made to last forever. But Dupont reworked this, and this is an example of recycling, even upcycling with a higher value of this material stream, where they crush the whole thing and they still use the material properties, what the material can do, heat resistance, UV resistance, etc. And they crush this and they make some kind of a paste with it that is then compressed into other components like brake discs for autos, for cars, where this heat resistance is still of importance. So the shape and form of the material is different, they crush it, but the inherent properties and advantages of those materials are kept, the heat resistance, only in a different form, but at least it has a higher value than just landfilling it, obviously. Now, very quickly over a couple of other examples. They can be quite easy. They do not have to be high-tech or complex at all, always. This is an example from the German Freitag. You might know this and you recognize a truck. The plastic truck bags that you can see right here, red-white color, once they are torn or damaged, they are just wasted. Nothing happens with it. But Freitag buys these truck bags and produces new products from it. Rucksacks, laptop bags, etc. And they use the inherent properties of that material. It's obviously rain resistant and water resistant. It's quite tough. It's very durable. And so they use these waste streams today to create a product with value. And it's a nice one because I don't know a lot of companies which can say that they get their raw material income for free. If your company can say that your raw materials, what you buy, is free, well, you can imagine that the business model is a lot easier to turn around than if you have to pay for your materials. This is an example of, in the butterfly diagram, the reuse or remanufacturing value loop, how you can do this in a company. What you see here is nearly new office furniture, NNOF in short. That's these guys, they buy big chunks of furniture, mostly in government agencies because it's large volume, and they clean it. Sometimes they update it a bit and put it on a standard that can be sold with guarantee again. But as you can imagine, with a much lower price, and they can do that compared to a new virgin production, because they don't have to buy materials, they don't have to start the production from scratch. Yes, it costs some money and time, but the business case, they can cycle around, and it's an example of a remanufacturing case. More creative solutions. Well, that's my background is in aeros, so I worked on some examples where this is a clear example of how you can maximize value of materials. What you can see in the center, you might recognize this as an aircraft engine inlet, a cowling as we call it. The value in scrap material of this part is about 250 euros. It's aluminium, a bit of titanium. The company here, Plain Industries, they put a very fancy support on that. They apply a leather cushions inside, and guess what? This chair is sold for about $20,000 US. 20,000 compared to 250 euros in scrap value. Yes, it goes some time and some manual working time, of course, so it has its price. But this is a great example on how you can maximize value of those materials by creating a new product from it. Other example on the left, I have this laptop bag myself. It's made from aircraft life-saving vests, which are thrown away at the end of life of an aircraft. It has no market value anymore. And those guys, they sell this bag for about 160 euros, much more actually than the €0 value those materials have. And it's a good destination. And so other examples are here as an example of upcycling and maximizing the value of material or component waste. I told you that sometimes new business models need to be adapted, and this is an example of new business models where, and it's quite shocking for some people. I have to admit sometimes when I explain this, you don't buy your hardware lighting structure anymore. If you want light in your house or in your company, you say, I want that amount of lumen, the light that is present, the lumens, the strong, the level of strength of your light intensity. On certain places, here lumen, because there's a work on a machine, here it can be X lumen, can be a bit less, etc. You define this along your factory shop floor, and then a company assures you that on each of these defined spots, you will have this amount of light. And you pay a monthly fee for it. And if the hardware, a lamp is broken or a housing is broken, they have the responsibility to come to replace it for free because it's part of the service. The underlying motivation is that if that company, and this can be examples, Philips, ETAP, Signify, etc., if they remain owner of this hardware, they are going to be damn sure that they make this from a very good quality, because they have to show up to repair it whenever there's a problem. And so it becomes in their best interest to make a good product that lasts long, because they simply don't have to intervene and pay for it once there is a problem. That's the underlying motivation. We speak about a service model. Lighting is one example of that model, but nowadays you have a complete spectrum of models where the product is not sold anymore, but put in the market as a service with the associated service that comes along with it. Of course, this can be a bit more easy. Sometimes it's very straightforward. The company producing floor solutions, they can work towards a high-tech solution where they claim to use almost no virgin material and 97% recycled material. This is also a very straightforward design measure to not use virgin material. On the right one, you have Caterpillar, also an example of prolonged life, where they take back engines, generators in this case, to fetch it again and put this again on the market. I go a bit quicker in on some examples. This is a Belgium-based Yuma Labs producing sunglasses from car dashboards. Again, a waste stream that has near to no value today, and they combined with PET and a 3D printing process make sunglasses from it with a take-back business model, meaning that if you, for whatever reason, hand in your bought glasses after a couple of years, you get a certain value, a certain amount of money for it, because the material for Yuma Labs is still worth a certain amount. Example of reuse on a sector where you might not think about it intuitively is the construction sector, where in this case the bricks are not joined by using cement or whatever glue, but are using a click system, facade click, therefore the name. So once the house is to be removed or renovated or changed, the bricks can be demounted and reused again without having to clean them from cement or joints. Other examples are, of course, present. I go a bit quicker there. This is an example of recycling and refurbishing, again, from a sector which you might not expect, the tapestry sector, and tapestry tiles, where the producer, Deso in this case, it's a multinational that provides these tapestry tiles, takes back the end-of-life tiles and processes this and separating the yarn back to suppliers and the bitumen, so the cover, the back cover of the tiles that is not usable anymore for new tiles. They offset this to the road and construction sector for use as bitumen. So they develop a value for their waste, if you want. Shared platforms are there as well, and it's not only the car sharing formulas that exist today. You have sharing platforms also for big corporates, for industrial machinery. Sometimes these machines cost quite a lot of money and they are not used every day or every hour. And then it might be interesting for a company to sell actually part of the time to another company that does not need it as well every day. And they can pool, they can share in that way the cost of such an expensive machine. Now, in terms of business models, you see a couple of examples right here. Without going into detail on all of these, quickly running over it, this graph resumes a couple of typical business models that are used if you adopt a circular economy in your sector. About 5 are noted here. The first one in yellow starts from the very beginning of your cycle. You buy materials, you design a product, and you produce it in your company. And then in the first business model, you might think of valorizing waste streams today, or recycled material content that you use to avoid a virgin material use. Everything starts right from the beginning. The second model might be more linked to once your product is made and produced and sold. And then we think about the butterfly diagram on intensifying the materials or prolonging the life of your product. And then you speak about a business model that you offer to your clients to repair the product or to share the product on a platform, for instance. In other words, try to extend the product life. Other modules or models, are applicable as well. We spoke about the service model. So going away from a typical sale to a single consumer. You have some options and some of them are easy to apply. Some of them are a bit more radical to apply, but all of them are linked to trying to implement one or more of these butterfly diagram value streams in a business context. So this slide summarizes very concretely which models you can use to implement in your sector, in your activity. Very quickly running over them, we spoke about procurement. And even if your company does not want to do anything at all, you can still have some procurement power in your supply chain and oblige your suppliers to take efforts in that field. We spoke about design. So designing a component which is modular. If the taste of consumers changes or the technology evolves very rapidly, it might be useful to make sure that you can replace your processor or a component that you expect to be outdated very quickly, to be able to repair and replace this very easily, but at least then you can still reuse the rest of your product. So we speak about the modular design, anticipating on things that can change, not having to throw away your component or your product completely. We spoke about circular design, making sure that all of these efforts are possible. Again, if you make a product, an assembly that is not that cannot be opened, you cannot replace a component inside, that's clear. Think about new business models on the repair and remanufacturing, new income streams. If your discrete sales, because you have a very good product, might drop, question mark, it's not always the case. Coming closer to the recycling scheme, try to think about creative ways, and mostly this can be completely in a different sector than you're used to work with. On upcycling, maximizing the material value of your end-of-life products. Adopt a new circular business model that allows those adoption ways. As I said, sometimes this means that your company has to adopt slightly the business model, and your financial colleagues will pose some questions on that. And then on the right side, you can see a resume of others, like a shared platform that we discussed, a valorization of waste streams, a life extension, an intelligent choice in the design of the materials that you choose, eventually or preferably not virgin at all. And then a co-creation, and that's very important in the supply chain. I would say one of the key takeaway messages of these sessions should be that whatever you adopt in your sector, in your activity, a circular economy typically only works if you take a look over the hedge and along the value chain of the partners you work with. And this is difficult. Companies are not used to do so. Again, they are used on focusing in a very lean, optimized way. But if you have to talk to, or have to get your materials back, you have to speak with people using your product once you have sold it. So the discussions extend along your supply chain, and this is something that's very important, this chain approach. Now, to be honest, there are some challenges. I promised to give you some in this last 10 minutes, let's say, of the session. We listed 5 of them. The first one is an important one. I just explained, is a value chain approach. If you want to create value from your materials, if your product becomes end of life, you have to talk with people that are faced at that stage of your product and receiving those goods again. And so again, companies are not used to bother whatsoever with what happens with their product once it is sold. So this requires a cooperation along the entire value chain. So first of all, you have to know your value chain. A lot of companies don't even know what happens with their product once it's sold. It begins already with that clarity. And then go with partnerships and speak with those people from your supply chain, either in the beginning, in the raw material supply, but also at the very end when the product becomes end of life, to be able to get it back or organize ways to get profit, to create money from either repair, remanufacturing, or other value streams that we discussed. But important is there to have a value chain approach rather than only looking at the activities of your own company. Second one, a challenge is financial. It's not a secret. Some companies have difficulties when using a service model to put a price on it. If I sell washing machines for 350 euros a piece, which price do I have to put on this monthly service fee that people have to pay me? I don't know. Well, I have to make sure that I have the same revenue as before. So it's not always difficult, not always easy, sorry, to get a very good number on it. And sometimes it's trial and error. So you have to allow yourself for the first limited trial, see what the market feedback is, learn from it before adopting it and implementing this on a much wider company scale. And again, here, depending on the model you use, your colleagues from the financial department will surely pose questions on it, rightfully. So it demands some number crushing. Sometimes they put a decent number on it. You have some legal challenges, no doubt. If you talk about getting your materials back or talking about sharing the product in a different business model, you often get questions on guarantee. Who is responsible for the product if this is shared? Is it the producer still? Is it somebody else? And then you come to some contractual settings that include guarantees, but often go even wider than the pure guarantee. As I explained, the value chain approach is important. If you work together with people outside your own, let's say, production facility, and you talk about organizing, getting those materials back, it's sometimes a completely different contract, right? And as we speak, people are developing from first pilots example contracts that others can use as an inspiration to not having to start from scratch again. But it's a legal challenge. Sometimes very straightforward, very technical, sometimes is the waste legislation. A company like Freitag or others that use a stream that is considered waste today have sometimes difficulties to legally being able to use this waste stream, because once it is labeled waste, you're not authorized to do something with it. It has to be documented and destroyed. And you cannot use this, let it be, sell it again as part of a product. So sometimes, depending on the country, the waste legislation is putting some hurdles on that. I will not list them all or go into detail on them all, but just to be complete here, there are some international standards that are currently under development, and you see it listed right there. It's an ISO standard with respect to circular economy that provide or will provide some insights and some legal guidance, if you want, on guiding business models, on measuring circularity, etc. So it's something to keep an eye on. It's for sure very interesting documentation to come up. A fourth challenge is linked to the technicalities. Absolutely not always technology is needed to take a step forward, absolutely not. But there are still cases where we do need some technology, and then we speak about which kind of levels of recycled content in bottles or plastics, for instance, can we take and can we organize. We speak about the % of recycled content, and then what about the certification? Sometimes, depending on the products you work with, we have some technical hurdles still. And then the fifth and last one challenge is the inverse logistics. That's also very important. Organizing to get your materials back in inverse logistic costs money and requires a cooperation with other companies that do this for you. And when we say this costs money, it has to be taken into account in your business model right from the beginning. Not to speak about the purely logistic, practical aspects on how you get these materials back, who will do this for me, and how much does this cost. And sometimes this is a maker or breaker for a circular business case, because people would like to have their materials back, but they did not anticipate the cost associated with it. And this then completely cracks the business case. So sometimes it's costly, and you have to clearly think about this beforehand if this is the case and applicable. Now, to conclude, some more references in the last couple of minutes. Very quickly, Circle Flanders is just an example of one region in Europe where we do this. We are working on about 6 strategic agendas, which you can see right here, going from the make industry over bio, food, chemicals, and construction. And we also have some policy levers, and then you can see and recognize here the finance aspects, but also the policy instruments linked to legal hurdles that we need to resolve to allow a circular economy adoption here. Just to refer, in case of any questions, you can take a look at the websites right here. We have, well, the website from ourselves, but also some sub-sites with specific information for policy on circular cities, on local governments, but also interesting a research center with a lot of scientific reports and studies linked to the circular economy that you might deep dive in and take a closer look at as background info. Also on the specific theme of ports, ports as a logistic hub to facilitate a circular economy. Also some upcoming work and a website that I can share here. Again, the same linked also for circular procurement, where you can browse through some inspiring cases and further references. So to conclude, well, I can invite you to, on our LinkedIn profile, follow the activities. So if you want to be inspired with some examples, feel free to team up, to link on LinkedIn, and you can follow some important milestones, reports that are developed, programs that we launch, etc. Feel free to do so. So rests me then to conclude on this session. We have seen then what a circular economy is. We have discussed about 6 important reasons why somebody like yourself, in whatever context, either non-profit or profit, should be adopting the circular economy in your sector, in your activity. We have seen 6 reasons. You don't have to follow them all, 6 even. But we have also seen on the conviction of why you should bother with this. Once you're convinced, how I can implement this in your activity, using the butterfly diagram as a basic guiding scheme, let's say, and then you can think for yourself how this can look like for your activity. Again, you don't have to attack and implement all of those lines in one shot. Sometimes it's easier to start small, to tank some confidence to get started. And then once you have the confidence, when you have some people around you that join the team, so to speak, you can scale up and do something more complex. But the most important message is to start at least with a modest action, firstly. We were fair and transparent in challenges that still exist. The circular economy is still for a lot of people something new. And I would lie if I say that it's very easy to adopt on a big scale on a short term. You will face challenges, but others have done this before you already and have learned from it. And it's important that those lessons are shared. But some challenges do exist. They are solvable. But again, we would lie if we would say that it is something as a free cake that you can start over a week and get started with. It requires some preparation and thinking work, and some challenges do exist. And then we have allocated some further references in case of interest that you can use in your activities.